The relationship control is influenced by the family resources on page 5 and the value controls found on page 6. In relationship management, we will look at the controls that affect our attitudes and actions towards God and others. Our first encounter with a relationship starts with our mother. This relationship sets the foundation for all of future relationships. We find human nature to be self-centered with a me-first attitude. Self-will demands that we have what we want and we want it now. Managing relationships requires understanding how to respond to others' demands. We find that there are 6 types of relationships. The first type being the general public. The relationship only involves the rules that society has set. On the relationship scale, it rates a 1, that of self-centered, could care less about others. The second type is that of a business relationship. On the relationship scale, it rates a 2, recognizing that others may be of some value. The third type is that of friendship. On the relationship scale, it rates a 3. Develop relationships to fulfill your needs. Willing to help if they will help back. The fourth type of relationship is that of family. On the relationship scale, the minimum rating is 4. Looking for ways to make the other successful. Putting others ahead of yourself. The fifth type is one's soulmate, and the relationship scale starts out at 5. Willing to sacrifice for others. And the sixth type is a relationship with God. Jesus was willing to die on the cross for a relationship with you. Our ability to manage a relationship with others will be limited until we have the right relationship with God. The question then is, how do we establish a right relationship with God? In Matthew 22:14, it tells us, "Many are called, but few are chosen." Those who are chosen hear God's calling them by the knock on their heart's door. Revelation 3:20 says, "Look, I've been standing at the door and I am constantly knocking." To hear the knock is to be aware that it is God who is calling you. You have to choose to answer the door. You can choose to ignore the knock and do your own self-will and go your own way. The choice to answer the door is to give up one's self-will and submit to God. Adam had the same choice to make. When God said, "Do not eat the fruit," it had nothing to do with the fruit. It was God's testing Adam to see if he would choose to submit to God. God was asking Adam to submit his will and not eat the fruit. The Bible tells us the second man, Jesus, did what God asked Adam to do. Even though Jesus was God, he laid aside his power and will and submitted to the Father. He gave up his self-will and came to earth and died for our sins. He became a servant. Did you know that the word servant is found 350 times in the Living Bible? Do you remember what Jesus told the disciples in Matthew 20? But Jesus called them together and said, "Among the heathen, kings are tyrants, and each minor official lords it over those beneath him. But among you, it is quite different. Anyone wanting to be a leader among you must be your servant. And if you want to be right at the top, you must serve like a slave. Your attitude must be like my own. For I, the Messiah, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. Those who are chosen have heard God's calling and opened their heart's door. Matthew 5:3 says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." The Living Bible translation says, "Humble men are very fortunate," he told them, "for the kingdom of heaven is given to them." The Amplified Version says, "Blessed, happy to be admired, are the poor in spirit, those devoid of spiritual arrogance, those who regard themselves as insignificant, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, both now and forever." We see here that spiritual arrogance means prideful or doing it my way, and humble is submissive and respective of others. They have the servant's heart. Recognizing that it is God who has chosen you leads one to a humble spirit and not demanding their own way. The Christian has surrendered their self-will to God. The humble spirit is the foundation to a relationship with God and to others. What are some of the other verses that we find in the Bible on humility? We find there are 54 verses in the Bible that has the word humble in it. We find our first example of servant and humility in Genesis 13:9. Abram tells Lot to choose which land he wants, even though Abram had the right to take the best land for himself. It says, "I'll tell you what we'll do. Take your choice of any section of the land you want, and we will separate. If you want that part over there to the east, then I'll stay here in the west section. Or if you want the west, then I'll go over to the east." What is your awareness level when it comes to the attitude and action of humble? Psalm 37:11 says, "But all who humble themselves before the Lord shall be given every blessing and shall have wonderful peace." Proverbs 18:12 tells us the difference between pride and humility. It says, "Pride ends in destruction. Humility ends in honor." Then in Proverbs 25, verses 6 and 7, it says, "Don't demand an audience with the king or push for a place among the great. It is better to wait for an invitation to the head table than to be sent away in public disgrace." In other words, don't think you're so important that you should be given a place of honor. We are given an example of the feeling of importance in the story of Haman and Mordecai in the book of Esther. We see that even the disciples had a problem with humility. In Matthew 18, verse 1, we read, "About that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' Jesus answered the question in verse 4. Matthew 18, verse 4 says, "Therefore anyone who humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Then in Matthew 23:12, Jesus says, "But those who think themselves great shall be disappointed and humbled, and those who humble themselves shall be exalted." Seems that we've heard that somewhere before. It was in Proverbs 18:12 where it said, "Pride ends in destruction, humility ends in honor." Let me ask you, who do you think you are? You need to remember what Isaiah 5:21 says. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes, and prudent in their own sight. Proverbs 3:7 tells us, don't be wise in your own eyes. Then in Romans 12, verse 3, we read, do not think of himself more highly than he ought to think. And in verse 16, we find, be not wise in your own opinion. In Philippians 2:3, we read, don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Are you starting to get the picture? Real humility comes from the heart. It is not just an outward appearance. Is your heart filled with pride and you are just putting on an outward show of humility? The attitude of, what's in it for me, is one of pride and desires self-centered attention. When you consider all the kings, the queens, the rulers of nations, and the billions of people who have gone before you and those who will come after you, one sees their life as being insignificant in this world. God sees each person as significant. He's made you and knows you by name. He wants to have a personal relationship with you. Humility is but the first step in having a relationship with God. On page 8, we'll look at the next value needed in having a relationship with God. To view the Notebook on Life series, visit us on the web at www.christianvisualarts.com.